These unique film documentaries were produced over 70 years ago. They are a valuable testimony to the modernization of the Czechoslovak army, which took place during the second half of the 30s. The efforts of that time culminated on the 23rd of September, 1938, with the declaration of the mobilization of Czechoslovak defensive power. This extraordinarily significant event in our history represented a decisive response to the wartime threat posed by the Nazi Third Reich. The rapid and successful course of mobilization secured Czechoslovakia worldwide renown. In the tense days that followed, the effort and commitment with which the army prepared for such a potential situation, one that had been built over the preceding years, became evident. The defenders of the Republic triumphed primarily by mustering an immense determination to defend their endangered homeland with all their strength and every available means. The roots of the success of the September mobilization must be sought in times of deep peace. The Czechoslovak army of that time developed modernization measures, for example in the years 32 and 33, that is, at a time when the Nazis in neighboring Germany were establishing a totalitarian regime. The main staff did not focus on their aggressive intentions, which fundamentally affected the security of the Republic. Instead, their efforts were directed towards ensuring that Czechoslovakia possessed a modern defensive potential, so that when the Nazis began to enforce their threats with a strong offensive army, which they were intensively building, the country would be prepared. However, the eastern conditions for realizing such an objective in Czechoslovakia were not particularly favorable. The nation was still grappling with the consequences of the economic crisis, which in those years caused defense expenditures to drop to the lowest level of the entire interwar period. Key institutions, however, soon realized the importance of a conceptually and financially well-secured peacetime development of the army. Public opinion, which identified with the defense of the state and was increasingly determined to support this most important national interest, greatly contributed to this effort. In particular, the defense loan became famous. It not only provided significant funds to cover the extensive material needs of the army, but also served as an unofficial referendum of the people. In it, citizens clearly expressed that the accelerated construction of the army was absolutely necessary in an international situation that was continuously deteriorating. The Czechoslovak army began to change its character significantly in the mid-30s. From the year 1936, an armament program and a plan for fortress construction were implemented. The latest modernization trends were represented by motorization, as well as the material and organizational growth of the military aviation. The adopted concept of strategic defense led to the decision to build permanent fortifications. The goals were truly generous. According to the expanded armament program from July 1937, the army was to receive more than 1,000 tanks, over 1,700 anti-tank cannons, also 700 mortars, no fewer than 400 anti-aircraft cannons, and an equal number of anti-aircraft machine guns, more than 2,400 artillery pieces, and 850 aircraft. These numbers for the armament were remarkably high, not only in terms of modernization, but also because the Czechoslovak army was introducing such state-of-the-art weapon models that had been completely absent before the mid-30s, or were present only in insignificant quantities. The main staff strove to ensure that the army, within its capabilities, kept pace with the evolution of global warfare in material terms, as well as with the progressive directions that dictated the development of warfare worldwide. In terms of the intensity of these preparations, Czechoslovakia was compared with foreign nations. In terms of the share of military expenditures in national income, Czechoslovakia was ranked 6th in the year 1937, ahead of major powers such as Great Britain and the United States of America. Together with Allied France, Czechoslovakia contributed the most to defense among all democratic states. In the year 1938, Czechoslovakia was ranked just behind the Japan-Soviet Union, Germany, and Italy, that is, among militarized states with totalitarian regimes. In the year 1934, a law on effective conscription was passed, which allowed maintaining a larger military force in arms than in previous years. By the summer of 1938, the number of officers in the Czechoslovak army had increased to 13,500, the number of non-commissioned officers to 8,700, subordinate non-commissioned officers to 7,000, and the manpower to 170,000. But the level of training increased, as did its complexity due to the newly introduced weapons. The organization of the army at that time was divided into separate types of troops and services. The basic component was the infantry, artillery, cavalry, air force, engineering troops, and telegraph troops. These services provided everything necessary for the smooth functioning of the army, both in peacetime and during wartime deployment. The infantry was regarded as the primary weapon, constituting approximately 60% of the peacetime army's manpower. Within it, in addition to classic infantry units, a number of additional units with specialized roles were incorporated. A certain elite segment of the infantry was considered to be the border guard battalions and border guard regiments, which were special military units designated for the defense of heavy fortifications. Additionally, the infantry included cyclist battalions and assault vehicle units. Especially in the border guard regiments and in assault vehicle regiments, it was required that only manpower of Czech or Slovak nationality be enlisted. The supporting role was assigned to the artillery. In the peacetime army, artillery accounted for approximately 20% of the manpower. Internally, it was divided into light, medium, heavy, and special categories. Anti-aircraft artillery was subordinate to the Air Force. Cavalry held the status of a traditional weapon. In the peacetime army, cavalry constituted approximately 6% of the manpower, although the importance of cavalry was generally declining. In the military art of the Czechoslovak army, this branch held a traditional and standard position. It was deployed especially for tasks such as conducting reconnaissance, establishing contact with the enemy, flanking enemy positions, and similar functions. However, the most significant position was held by the Air Force, which made up only about 6% of the peacetime army's manpower. By the year 1938, it was possible to establish and equip 55 field aviation units. Observation and reconnaissance aviation accounted for 38% of the military aviation. Fighter aviation had the same percentage representation, and the share of bomber aviation was 24%. The engineering troops, which accounted for 6% of the peacetime army organization, performed a very diverse range of activities. Their tasks ranged from various demolition works through the construction and repair of communications to specialized water-related tasks. The telegraph troops accounted for 3% in the peacetime organization. With the advent of the year 1938, it became increasingly evident that this year would be associated with extraordinarily serious events. In connection with Czechoslovakia, national situations began to develop seriously for the first time in May. The indicative signs of a serious threat to the security of Czechoslovakia were dealt with decisively. On the 20th of May, a state of alert at the borders was declared, thereby demonstrating the determination to defend. It was made clear to Nazi Germany that no one would be tolerated meddling in its internal affairs. The youngest annual reservists and selected reservists from older cohorts were called to arms. 371,000 members of the Czechoslovak army carried out the operations. Czechoslovak Democrats believed that in the event of war, they would not be left alone. Extraordinary measures ended on the 22nd of June, but the calm during the summer was only apparent. All of Czechoslovakia was being intensively prepared for war. It was clear that the first strikes of the anticipated war would hit the defenseless civilian population. For this reason, a system of civil anti-aircraft defense was rapidly organized. Citizens were universally informed about the methods of protection against chemical warfare agents. There was no doubt whatsoever that the enemy would deploy them during aerial bombardment. The purchase of gas masks was mandatory, and their production was rising sharply. Factories produced 10,000 units per day. The contribution of the army also had crucial importance in this area. Its specialized facility, the Combat Chemical Institute in Olomouc, also inspected 25,000 masks per day. The situation began to deteriorate sharply at the beginning of September. The German side triggered bloody incidents in the border areas. The security situation of the Republic worsened with each passing day. The army activated new emergency measures. First, the threatened sections of the state borders were quickly closed off by means of engineering barricade measures on the roads, which were intended to prevent the sudden advance of enemy troops. Around the middle of September, the losses among the defenders of the state borders began to increase. Amid the wave of violence, the Czechoslovak government responded by declaring martial law in a number of border political districts. Military assistance units were deployed to the border areas to help the state administration in restoring order and peace. After the government was dissolved, the Sudeten German Party, which had initiated an armed struggle against everything that represented the Czechoslovak state order, was also dissolved. The unimaginable pressure from Western governments which tried to appease the German Nazis at the expense of Czechoslovakia culminated on the 21st of September in the adoption of the so-called Anglo-French Plan. According to it, Czechoslovakia was supposed to cede the border regions in which less than 50% of the inhabitants were of German ethnicity. This was a decision imposed by unprecedented pressure on President Edward Beneš and the government. Immediately afterward, a huge wave of opposition to this decision emerged in Czechoslovak society. Outrage reached its peak. Citizens demanded the resignation of the government of Milan Hoxha, which in their eyes had capitulated, even though until then they had expected that it would not yield under pressure. People demonstrated in front of the building of the National Assembly. The political position of the incumbent cabinet had indeed become unsustainable, and therefore on the 22nd of September it resigned. Public associated new hope with the government, and at its helm was appointed Army General Jan Sirový, a widely recognized leading military figure and hero of the Russian legions. The next day, mobilization was declared. Society did not want war, but the announcement of mobilization, which came for the first time on the evening of the 23rd of September, 1948-38, triggered a huge wave of the best moral forces of nation-building citizens, which was the fundamental prerequisite for successful defense. In the strong human fear of war, there emerged a unique and immense determination to defend the endangered homeland. The obligations arising from the mobilization plan affected every citizen. Everyone was convinced that in the war, which was expected to break out any day, they would not be left alone. It was expected that the Western Allies would eventually cease appeasing Hitler and come to Czechoslovakia's aid. Hopes were also connected with an alliance with the Soviet Union, even though its help was objectively uncertain and practically difficult to realize. The entire country was preparing for war. Gas masks and blackout measures became characteristic elements of the days of mobilization. The arrival of the reserves was considered crucial. It was precisely the ability to react quickly to the emerging military-political situation that ensured the smooth operation of the Czechoslovak army at that time. The worldwide renown of its voice is evident even today. The military significance of mobilization lay in the fact that the enemy was very quickly deprived of the opportunity to take advantage of the element of surprise. No sooner had mobilization been declared than the command structure of the wartime army was functioning. The maneuvering of the Czechoslovak troops was formed over one dramatic week and completed the induction lineup. Just when the Czechoslovak Republic was best prepared for combat and when there were more than 1 million men in arms, the first ominous reports about the preparation of a conference of the four powers in Munich emerged. At that moment, it was most sorrowful that the chairman of the French government, Édouard Daladier, and the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain arrived in the Bavarian metropolis, representatives of democratic countries with whom the founders and builders of the Czechoslovak state shared the democratic principles of statecraft. By signing the Munich Agreement, which they signed together with the dictators Hitler and Mussolini, they betrayed Czechoslovakia. But they also brought future ruin upon their own countries. German Nazis expressed satisfaction, but soon began preparing the liquidation of Czechoslovakia after Munich. From the beginning of the year 1938, the border pillars that until then had delineated the Czechoslovak state borders began to collapse. By the 10th, the German army had occupied the ceded territories. The mobilized Czechoslovak army suffered a heavy blow during the Munich shock. It must be greatly appreciated that even though it could not fulfill its main mission of pre-war defense of the state, the role of the pillar of society that endured the inner tragedy of Munich, it completely fulfilled its role. It was the one that, in the difficult Munich times, represented the primary element of continuity of the First Masaric Czechoslovak Republic.